everybody. It's Monday, October 17th, and that means it's time for another episode of Nonprofit Conversations. I'm your host, Cecilia Sepp. I am a certified association executive, and I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm pleased to continue our 2022 trend of first-time guests, and I'm really excited to welcome a longtime colleague and friend of mine, Bill Schankel, from the NAFA Fleet Management Association. But before we jump into our conversation, I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to our global audience, wherever you may be. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and make sure you don't miss an episode. Today, we're going to talk about changing chapter models. That's a very important conversation. It's been going on actually most of the year within our association management community. And Bill actually took action on this. So Bill, welcome to the podcast. I want to throw it over to you to say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you having me here. And I'm Bill Schankel, as you mentioned, CAE. I've been in the association space for a little over 25 years. I am currently the CEO of NAFA Fleet Management Association. We are an association of automotive fleet managers. We have about 3,000 members that represent fleets from both the government sector and corporate side of things. So everybody from your school districts to city government to police, fire, EMT, and then on the corporate side from deliveries from Amazon down to sales fleets and utility fleets that are out there managing everything. So we have a very important member base. And as I said, we represent about 3,000 members throughout North America.
And that is a really diverse community that you represent. And so I can see how chapters would really be helpful in engaging your membership and keeping them excited and involved in your organization. So we in the community, component relations, chapter relations community, and nonprofit at large have been having this ongoing conversation. And it did kind of intensify earlier this year, talking about rogue chapters and new models. And are we using a 19th century model? So can you tell us a little bit about what your model was like before, and then how you came to the conclusion you need to update it, and then what it looks like now?
Sure. So NAFA has had chapters for years, well before I came into NAFA, and the chapters have been an important part of NAFA's Fleet Management Association since about the 1990s. And all of our chapters in the early 2000s, we have 33 chapters. They became independent entities. So they became separately incorporated entities in the early 2000s, I guess around 2008, 2009. At the time, they're all volunteer run. None of them have any staff or any management at that time. NAFA still managed some of the governance elements of that. So we still paid for and managed the registered agents so they could file their incorporation, various files they needed to do. We worked with them on some of the audits, things like that. But essentially, it was all volunteer driven. Early in that time, the chapters were really doing well. We had a lot of volunteers building some really strong programs, both educational, networking programs. So everything from holding a conference of a panel of speakers to your typical kind of golf tournaments to holiday events to going to go-kart tracks. So they're very active. A lot of different chapters were involved. Again, we had 33. More or less followed the metropolitan areas that you would assume throughout the U.S. and Canada. But as things started to change and as everybody's time became a really important element of what they did, and volunteers started to drop off, and some of the longtime volunteers moved into new careers and didn't have the time or started to retire and didn't have the same amount of new volunteers raising up. And then obviously the pandemic really changed all of that. And then we started noticing some of the chapters became dormant or inactive. And over the last 5 years, we went from 33 really active chapters to 15, then it became 10, and then it became 12. So active chapters started dropping off. We had each chapter had their own bank account. They were independent entities. So NAFA from a corporate side didn't have access to any of those bank accounts. And we had some chapters that started to lose their longtime treasurer who retired to the island somewhere and somebody lost contact with them, and all of a sudden there was no signer on the bank account that was available to get funds in and out. And NAFA, since they were separately incorporated, didn't have a lot of influence or wasn't able to help a lot with that from a national level. So our board started saying, well, what's going on here? Are we going to have enough volunteers to really fill in the gaps? How can we help take some of these administrative functions off of them, where they have to find bank account numbers, where they have to run annual audits, where they have to manage their own contracts, get their own insurance, things like that. So that's kind of where this whole process started.
That is, oh my gosh, every chapter relation director or professional's nightmare. Money lying around that you can't get to, people disappearing to the islands, but at least they didn't take the money with them, right?
Right.
They left the money behind when they went to the island.
Right. We haven't had that issue. Yeah.
Which is always good, because sadly, sometimes that does become an issue. So it sounds like it's really interesting, Bill. It sounds like you're using the term chapters, but maybe they're really affiliates. Is that accurate?
It is. Yeah. It's really a kind of a, what we built out. It is NAFA chapters, but really they become affiliates of that. There's a chapter affiliation agreement between national and NAFA to have them, certainly follow a certain level of policies and such. But as probably most chapter relations individuals know, as volunteers start changing and those affiliates get a little further and further from the initial intent of what those policies are, and chapters start running things the way they run things. And not that there was any negative intent, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just hard to build a kind of a common member experience across everything when certain chapters run things one way and other chapters run things a different way. So
that's right. Well, see, and that reminds me of the conversation we were having in our community back in the late 90s about the Starbucks experience. And we were really realizing whatever our local networking group is, it needs to be a fairly consistent member experience across the board, despite the fact they will have their own unique identity. Because, basically you go to Starbucks, you have basically the same experience, but it might be a little different depending on where the Starbucks is, the size of the Starbucks.
Right.
And so it may have some regional identity or local identity to it. And that is really important. And I think that one of the issues we see, and I've been talking about this for years, is the fact that we're using a model that doesn't work anymore. Because it's based in like the 19th century when people didn't get together very often. So we had what I call the mini-me association. So the chapter basically looked just like the national, but it was in your state or your town. And as we've changed the way we live, that model really hasn't caught up. And so it sounds like in your story so far, the first part of the story is it was working, then it stopped working, and your board said, what can we do to fix it? So what did you do? What did you decide to do to change your chapter structure?
Sure. So what we're working through right now, and we're in the process of this. So we've worked with some outside groups. We developed a internal task force of regional chapter leaders, some with really strong chapters that are running and we're really doing things well. Some with chapters that were struggling, that didn't have anything. And then we've also talked to members that never had a chapter experience. So we've had, we have a fair amount. 33 chapters sounds like a lot, but when you look at the size of, North America, that's not that many chapters really in the scheme of
really
things.
Not.
No, and it was interesting. So we talked to all these chapters, talked about some of the problems. You had some of the chapter officers in the middle of this saying, we don't understand the problem because we're running a very successful chapter. We run 12 events a year. We have 50 people at every event. We have a solid bank account. Things are going well. We have our processes down. And, our comment to them was, that's great. We would like to, help other areas of the country build on what you're doing. But in the model, the way it is right now, it's very hard for them to do that. We've had other chapters that say, I'm trying, some of the volunteers said, I'm it. There's no other volunteers for a chapter and I'm trying to run things. We had one chapter officer who ran a chapter that most of their events were in a city that was a 6-hour drive one way for him to get to that, because that's how big the geographic region of the chapter was. So he said, when I go to run the event and I'm serving as the chair of that event, it's a 12-hour round trip for me to get there for a 2-hour event. So we said, obviously, there's some things that we're trying to fix. So I think in part of this building, when we said, all right, so what do we need to do? Essentially, we came down to, we really think we need to eliminate the structure of the incorporated chapters and build regions. So we've worked through that. We've got everybody to agree that we're going to eliminate the 33 separately incorporated affiliates, which we call chapters, and then build essentially 8 regions throughout North America. And within those regions, there can be local networking groups, which essentially would be, so for instance, if NAFA Chicago chapter could still maintain their local entity if they're running really well, and they would be NAFA Chicago, not NAFA Chicago chapter, just NAFA Chicago, and they would still maintain their local networking area. But from a regional side, we're going to build a regional support council. So we're going to build people from the local regions, or the local chapters within those regions will be part of this council to help plan and identify opportunities. But we're also going to reach into the region where there was no chapter. So we had underserved members that weren't getting that chapter experience, and giving them an opportunity to kind of step up and say, I'd love to be involved in this, but I didn't have any interest in developing or creating a separately incorporated entity in the past, with everything that went along with it.
Yeah, and that is really an elegant solution to the addressing this question of what are we going to do about the chapter model. How many regions did you end up identifying?
So we ended up with 8 regions, and we've it was a little bit back and forth. So there was a debate over what's too big of a region. I think the at one point it was like, we're going to have 15 regions, and then it became too narrow of a group, and then it was, at one point it was 6, and we kind of settled on 8, which makes sense. The goal with the regions is that, and telling the volunteers from the regional council side, is your job is to not, from a regional council, travel across that whole region and hold events. Your job from the regional council is to kind of work with the members within your region and give them opportunities to, what we're calling, kind of do pop-up events in your area. So the other goal of this is that you don't have to be a long-time volunteer. So how we created this as a regional council is, you can just find somebody that just has an idea, they want to run one event, they want to run a panel discussion on electric vehicles in Des Moines, Iowa, for one day. They can do that. They can set that up, and they can run that event. It can go really well, and then they can go away and not have to worry about anything else until they want to do something else. They don't have to commit to a long-term volunteer. So we were trying to create these kind of micro volunteer opportunities for people to engage in areas that didn't have these chapters. And in the past, the chapter involvement was you have a 3-year commitment. It's a long-term piece. There's a lot of bureaucracy and administrative elements to running your own affiliate, your own entity. We try to eliminate all that. A lot of those pieces now fall onto NAFA staff, paid staff, to worry about the contracts, the liability insurance, all those things. We'll handle all that. They just need to worry about setting up events for members that are going to add value.
So you mean you're actually giving your volunteers a volunteer experience instead of making them do a second unpaid job?
We are. That's our goal. That's our goal. And that's really how we sold this to a lot of it. And, there's some volunteers that really like the element of the unpaid job. They love this. They were a chair of a chapter for years, and they love that piece of it. So our regional councils, which will be, depending on the region, which will be 5 to about 10 members, kind of a regional board, essentially. We explained to some of our chapters that want to stay really involved. That's the role for you. The regional council will be that 2 to 3 year term that lets you stay involved, lets you do, I don't say dig into day to day, because it won't be day to day, but dig into a little bit deeper into the details of how we're going to do this, help shape the regions. So there's opportunities to still do those long-term, really deep dive association leaderships. But in the other piece of this is, we have a lot of members that I want to volunteer. I just don't have the time, but I'd love to step up. So we're giving the other members a chance to say, you don't have to, all you do is say, hey, I want to run an event. I want to speak at an event. And you can do that. And it can be as short of a 2-week volunteer window to a few months. And And when you're done, like, we're not going to hold you to it. It can, you can move on and come back if you want. That's great. So it's also we're hoping that'll help create a little bit of a pipeline of future talent and leaderships too. So we can see like, hey, this person ran 3 really good events, and when they feel they're ready to invest more time, that gives us somebody we can go to say, hey, would you like to step up and join a national committee or a national board, things like that.
So let's summarize quickly for the audience. So you had the traditional chapter model, which was basically replicating what the national does, but locally, with separate bank accounts, separate boards, separate committee structure, separate everything, bylaws, EIN numbers, maybe and their own incorporation. So you had a whole network of affiliates.
Right.
And then you removed all of that admin burden, created more opportunities for a wider variety of members to get involved at whatever level it is. You use the word micro-volunteering, which does my heart good, because I don't think we talk about it enough anymore. It was a big thing 20 years ago, and either I guess we just assumed we absorbed it or we just quit talking about it. But we do need that micro-volunteering, many opportunities for people to do what they want to do when they can. So you've completely changed this model. You're giving people more flexibility, more time to do what they really want to do as a volunteer. So did everybody feel really comfortable about this? Like, did everybody go in with a positive attitude? This is great what we're doing? Or was there any discomfort or maybe scary conversations?
No, yeah, it was a scary conversation. This process where we finally got to the point of where the model would be, started, I'll say, the end of 2020. 2021 was a lot of those various meetings with our regional groups, talking to members. Towards the end of 2021, we started getting into the discussion about implementing this. We still had a lot of long-term chapter members, some of our national members, some of our board, even some of our staff that was a little bit concerned of what does this look like? What does this mean? There's an element of, is this a takeover from national? What are we doing? So there was, as we said, each chapter had their own finances. So, everything from literally the word money grab from national, which isn't the case. So we had to address all of those, basically the objections. We tried to address those. We created a whole communication plan around those. So things like the finances, as the chapters close and the bank accounts come into NAFA bank accounts, they're still going to be under a separate chapter account. So they'll still be transparent as that chapter account, and it'll fall under whatever region they're within. It's up to that regional council how they want to use those funds. If that regional council decides that they want to use the funds from this chapter for that specific metro area moving forward, that's fine. They can do that, and that's how we'll track it. We already know we do have some regions that have 4 or 5 chapters that are coming in, and those chapter leaders say, no, we just want all of our money in a big bucket to really invest in this region and make this work well. We have some other regions that have chapters that were really strong, that have a strong loyalty and member base, that say, we want those local networking groups to maintain that former chapter affiliate feel. And we, what we told everybody, this is going to be an evolution. So the first year it may be like this, the second year may be like this, and all of a sudden, after year 3, we're going to find kind of that middle ground that really works best for everyone, and we really understand what works. So I think that was the biggest way we overcame some of the objections. We can answer the basic questions, what we know now, kind of alleviate some of the fears, but also let them know that what we're looking for is leaders on these regional councils that are going to help us grow this and constantly help it to evolve to where it needs to be. We keep talking to them about, what happened with our chapters. It was kind of, we set it and forget it. And then they've essentially over the years just fell off because there was no real support. There was no evolution. What do we need to do to make this better? So with the regions, we want to make sure that we're constantly looking at it and what do we need to do to evolve it. So we're not having this conversation 20 years down the road and saying, well, our regions dropped off because we didn't do anything about it. We just figured it's a good model. So that's I think how we've kind of sold this, and that's something where we work through. But there was still some nervousness around groups. But when we started acting on it, there's really a lot of those fears were alleviated, and there's nobody really raising any major red flags now, and we're just moving forward.
Well, and the way that you have handled this, I really want to compliment you. You came up with the plan, you analyzed the situation first, you realized that there was a problem that
Right.
needed solving, you analyzed the situation, you came up with a plan, then you built the communication plan around the pain points
Right.
to win people's support. And I think that is really, any chapter relations professional will tell you that is really the only way to make anything seriously change. So this is fantastic. And so then you have these regional councils, and they have a lot of autonomy, it sounds like, to make decisions, make
They're
things
going,
happen.
yeah, they're really going to. We've created kind of a regional council charge. So a description of essentially here's what it is, but it's especially year one, we've left it more or less open. It's not as directed as I'll say some of our national committees, which here's what you're going to do. It's kind of here's year one and years two, what our expectations are. And what we wanted to do is make sure we gave some autonomy to each region, understanding each region has a slightly different member makeup, slightly different demographics, slightly different challenges of the geographic spread of where those members are. So letting everybody do it their own way. And the other thing we've done too is there's our regions, we split up North America, but the Canadian provinces and states aren't necessarily in separate regions. So a Northeast region includes New England and Quebec and Nova Scotia and all those areas. Ontario falls in. So we understand like each region is going to have different challenges, different opportunities, and we wanted to let them do that and not say, hey, we're going to dictate it. We are going to put certain policies and expectations in. We're going to set up kind of a here's the typical type of events that we will support. So there's 5 buckets of types of events that the regional councils can put on or run, but we're not going to really push, here's what we expect you to do. It's up to the regional council to figure out how they want to run that. And like I said, with the finances too, do they want to keep money that came in from a local group to that local group, or they want to invest that and build other areas out that may not have had a local group in the past?
So one of the things I'm wondering, I wasn't thinking about the fact you're actually international with these regions, with the Canadian members. I hadn't thought about that, but one of the things I'm a little curious about now is you said you have 8 regions across North America.
Right.
So are all the regions about the same size, or like are some out west bigger? Try to keep them the same.
Yeah, they're about the same size from a member number. There's some that have a larger geographic area. So we have a mid-Atlantic region, which is essentially Pennsylvania through Virginia, with Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia in there. It's probably the smallest of the regions, but also the most, one of the highest number of members in there. So we tried to keep an even number of members. We looked at it different ways. We looked at it from metropolitan service areas, assuming that there's still going to be, most of the events are going to be in or around a metropolitan area and or suburbs. So we tried to make sure each region had the same amount of larger cities that events could be held in and or around. And then we also wanted to make sure we had a fairly even split of members. And then we also took the region and made sure we had a fairly even split of existing chapters. We wanted some volunteers that understood how chapters work. So we didn't want to have any region that didn't have any existing chapters in it. So we tried to split up 2 to make sure there's at least 3 chapters within those regions. So we used some really clear metrics to say, what should we build a region around? And that's how we came to those 8.
Wow, that is fantastic. I love hearing this. If you haven't considered presenting this as a case study at a association conference, association management conference, I would say, please go for it. This is fantastic. Really, seriously, I want to praise you and commend you for this. And you said you're in year 2 now. So I guess year 3 is 2023.
2023. So our goal is that we're going to do our region kickoff at our annual meeting, which is in April of next year. So we have our every year we do. So our kind of official region get together, meet your regional council members. They'll start their term in April of 2023. Really kind of highlighting the regions, letting attendees know through some of the communications and on their badges which region you're in, and really highlighting that and doing a big splash. This is our regional kickoff. Right now we're in the phase of getting those regional volunteers on. So we're doing some call for volunteers right now. We're also in the dissolution process. So we have chapters actually voting to dissolve now. We've had, I believe we're at 7 or 8 that have officially voted to dissolve. We have 6 or 7 others that are happening. We have a few that, we're working with each of them now to go through the process. We have a few that wanted to wait till after the 2022 to dissolve in 2023. So again, we're also being giving those chapters some agency too on when and how they want to do that, as long as it's all wrapped up again by April 2023, so we can kick everything off in that piece. But it's interesting. We've had, all the chapters are doing electronic votes of their members to dissolve, and with all the kind of, as you brought up, the fear and such, we've had no real pushback. Those votes have all went very smoothly, and everybody's looking forward to the next phase of this. So I think the more we communicate it out, and then when the action started happening and people were understanding, like, oh, this is a good thing, we've been really positive feedback, and it's been fairly smooth transition. And I have a really good staff too that's working on it. So my membership department, and we actually hired a regional engagement manager, and she's been working with every chapter officer to really lay this out, sitting with the chapter boards, talking with them, answering questions, spending a lot of one-on-one time, or one on the board time with each chapter officer. So she's done a lot of that now. So that's been very helpful as well.
Oh, that is fantastic. And I think building a big event next year to really show the enthusiasm and support for this is an example other associations can follow. And I do encourage other associations to look to what Bill has done at NAFA Fleet Management, because yes, you can change. And I think, Bill, you and I talked a little bit about the fear factor as we were getting ready for this episode. And I really do think people put up obstacles to resolving this kind of a chapter structure question. And the other thing, we're going to need to wrap up. I mean, it's been such a great conversation. I would love to talk to you for another half an hour, but we need to move on with the day. But I do have one other question for you before we wrap up. So the market, not the marketing, that's the wrong word. The branding now is going to be NAFA Chicago or NAFA Minnesota,
right,
depending what the region is. So what impact do you think that's going to have on NAFA's awareness within society in the marketplace? Do you think that's going to put you in a stronger position by branding everybody in a similar way?
I do. Yeah, we've already had some. So we've had a lot of members already talk to us that haven't been involved in chapters for various regions, that now I feel we've kind of branded this as a one NAFA. So we've took it to say it's more inclusionary, inclusion of everybody. So one NAFA. So I think everybody being that NAFA and not having that separate, for whatever reason, that chapter tag at the end of NAFA Chicago chapter created an element of separation, whereas, hey, NAFA Chicago, and that's just NAFA in Chicago, and anybody can go there. There's no, the other piece of this too is you're not joining a chapter, you're in a region. I mean, you joined a chapter, now you're in a region, you're not joining a region. So there's an element of too, is just by virtue of where you are, you're just part of NAFA in that region. And as we've told all of our members too, like there's no walls between regions either. So if you're traveling and you see a NAFA LA and you're there in LA, you can go to NAFA LA's event because it's one NAFA. So we think that is going to be very, very helpful. And we think there's a lot of members excited about that didn't have that weren't included in chapters in the past, that now feel much more included in the NAFA experience.
That's fantastic, because it's basically NAFA where you are.
Right.
So
exactly.
whether you're at your home base or you're traveling for business or pleasure, it's wherever you are is where NAFA is. So
right.
That is really, and to me as a former CRP, still a CRP at heart too, in a lot of ways, that is the experience we've always been trying to build for our members, whether we have formal chapters or affiliates, or we have local networking groups, whatever it is. We really want people to feel like no matter where I am, I'm part of the group, I'm part of the organization. So Bill, this has been fantastic. I am so pleased for you. I remember we had talked about this last year, that you were working on changing the structure, and it seems to be going really well. Fantastic example and model for others to look to. So as we wrap up this episode, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And then if they wanted to follow up with you directly and maybe get some tips and more advice from you about this, how they could do it themselves, how could they get in touch?
Sure. So I guess the one thought I have is just, and you brought up a little bit, is, you can't let fear really run it. And as we tell everybody, is we don't have all the answers, but I think it's all around evolution. So some of these programs is, as you start acting, you create the clarity. So action created a little bit of clarity with us, and that's really what we did. If anybody wants to reach out to me, you can email me. Feel free. It's bshankel@nafa.org. I'm happy to talk about this, or have you talk with some of my staff that's involved in day-to-day. We have a lot of volunteer leaders that are willing to speak about this. So please reach out. We're excited to see where it ends up. But so far, so good. So, and I really appreciate the time.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for accepting the invitation. And if you're interested, I'd love to have you back next year and find out how year 3 is going.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds great. Okay. Well, thank you, Bill. Bill Schankel, CEO of NAFA Fleet Management, sharing how he changed his chapter structure. And yes, folks, it can be done. I'm not the only one who believes it, and Bill actually did it. So thank you again, Bill. We have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next week with another exciting episode of Nonprofit Conversations. Don't miss an episode. Please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast service. We're on all of them. So if you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out our website, roguetulips.com. If you are a current CAE or a CAE candidate and need education, check out the Rogue Tulips Education Program, the 501c League, at the 501cleague.net. On behalf of Bill and myself, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.